있는데도 방역 당국의 에이즈 관리는 허술하기 짝이 없습니다.
환자건 외계인이건 이제 상관 안 해요. 저요. 동성애자예요.
Picture this. It's the day after Christmas, sometime in the early 2010s. As the holiday draws to a close, you and thousands more across Korea settle in to catch the premiere of a TV special on KBS. The setup is unremarkable at best. Jung Moon-gi, a middle-aged businessman, is drifting apart from his wife due to work stress. You've seen this plot a dozen times, you think to yourself, and brace for the usual affair storyline. But hang on, who's this new character? Instead of a mistress, it's a male coworker who steps in to help Moon-gi through his marital rough patch. Your interest deepens as the two guys grow closer, and then, what's this? The coworker has an ex-boyfriend? You can hardly believe what you're hearing, but nothing prepares you for the final scene. You may think this all sounds a little unrealistic for 2010 South Korea. And you're right, because the show I just described aired in 1999. Penned by 33-year-old No Hee-kyung, the screenwriter behind such TV shows as It's Okay, That's Love, and Our Blues, Sad Temptation made Korean television history as one of the first shows to portray homosexuality in a sympathetic light. Though it wasn't the first to take a stab at the gay issue. That was likely a 1995 episode of the soap opera General Hospital, in which one of the characters counsels an AIDS patient about his diagnosis, and confuses gender dysphoria with same-sex attraction, but it's the thought that counts. Later that year, the miniseries Jazz hinted at the bisexuality of its male lead with whatever this interaction was. Sad Temptation was simply the latest in a string of shows from the 90s with queer themes, although it was the first one to have any real success. Before 1999, viewers and critics alike had viciously attacked dramas like General Hospital for featuring queer characters. One article from the time read, "One thing is clear, homosexuality is far from a healthy sentiment that can be routinely covered and expanded upon on television." This reviewer from the Hankyoreh was by no means alone in his opinion. That same year, the Gyeongyang Shinmun ran an article warning that homosexual themes in dramas were a sign of moral decadence and an end-of-century phenomenon. Miraculously, Sad Temptation received almost no backlash, despite being much more forward with its representation. Instead, critics and viewers praised the drama for forcing them to reconsider their biases against gay people. One of the newspapers responsible for slandering queer dramas now asked, "Is homosexuality truly a divine punishment?" Now, some speculate that this change of heart around Sad Temptation could be from KBS billing the show as an end-of-century special. The logic here being, hey, the world might end in a couple days, so what's the harm in being a little queer? But I think the bigger reason for Sad Temptation's warm critical reception lies in its careful treatment of homosexuality. It views being gay as an unfortunate affliction, a wretched state deserving of pity rather than anger. That position might get conservatives off our backs, but can we really call it queer positive? I'm not so sure. In her defense, No stood to lose everything by making a drama about homosexuality. Less than a decade earlier, during the height of the AIDS epidemic, a news anchor had proclaimed to millions of viewers that Korea has nothing to worry about because we have no homosexuals. It goes without saying that queer people have always existed in Korea, whether the government liked it or not. Yet this statement, delivered on national television less than 50 years ago, shows just how powerful the state was in censoring queer voices. One senior producer recalled, in the 1980s, if someone mentioned homosexuality, people asked if they were in their right mind. That don't ask, don't tell approach to queerness had prevailed through much of the 20th century. But around the mid-90s, Korea's gay population began fighting back with, what else? The internet. BBS, or bulletin board systems, played an essential role in the rise of gay activism in Korea. Not only did these online forums provide safe spaces for closeted Koreans, they enabled activists to reach those beyond their local communities. Within months of using BBS, groups like Kirikiri and Chingusai had welcomed hundreds of new members and established firm roots on college campuses, much to the joy of local activists and to the chagrin of religious conservatives. Newspapers ran salacious articles about the diseased ivory tower, with a few journalists even characterizing gay and lesbian organizations as high-profile sex clubs. But through all the scaremongering headlines and conservative hand-wringing, one thing remained clear. The once unmentionable topic of homosexuality was finally out of the closet. Since 1999, activists have appeared on talk shows to debunk myths surrounding AIDS. Hong Suk-chun climbed the ranks as Korea's first openly gay celebrity, and most recently, the country broadcast its first gay dating show. And remarkably, across each decade, TV dramas reflected and, in some cases, anticipated these queer milestones. 2007's Coffee Prince, for example, brought homophobia to the forefront of Korean television, just as activists began taking to the streets in defiance of anti-gay legislation. 3 years later, Life is Beautiful fostered a dialogue with conservatives in response to their growing hostility towards the gay community. Yet despite these and dozens more shows tackling queer topics, many viewers, including me at one point, have asserted that Korean dramas are nothing but sanitized, straight-washed fluff. In fairness, a few dramas do fall into this category of completely uncontroversial entertainment. Take 2010's Personal Taste, a drama that somehow avoids politics despite revolving around a gay-for-pay interior designer. But remember, just like in the US or any other country, TV in Korea is not a monolith. Beyond the carefully packaged cultural exports, you'll find dozens of dramas that engage with pressing social issues. Dramas like Mad for Each Other, a 10-episode rom-com that tackled trans panic all the way back in 2019.
맞아요. 경찰서에 신고해야 되는 거 아닌가?
신고는? 아니 여자 옷 입은 걸로 뭘로 신고를 해요? 잘못한 게 없는데.
These shows may not be gay rights manifestos, but lumping them in with apolitical fluff is a tremendous insult to the writers who fought tooth and nail for queer representation on the small screen. No Hee-kyung risked the end of her career by writing Sad Temptation. I think we owe it to her to take her contributions seriously. And trust me when I say this, No's not the only writer pushing for more gay representation in Korean dramas. The national mood is still overwhelmingly conservative, but there has always been a discourse of queer resistance on college campuses, in the workplace, and yes, on television. And if we truly want more inclusive cast and crews working on the shows we love, it certainly wouldn't hurt to acknowledge those who, at some point, managed to carve out a space for gay characters on the airwaves, no matter how small. In a nutshell, that's my aim for this video series. Not to recount every instance of gay representation in K-drama history, God knows how long that would take, but to chart how certain shows reflected, and in some cases enabled, the rise of gay activism in Korea. Hopefully, by the end of this journey, I'll have added some shows to your watch list. But more importantly, I'll have deepened your knowledge of international queer history. So, without further ado, let's return to where we left off, in 1999. Before that, though, let's revisit 1996, the year a young actor made his debut on a television sitcom. That actor's name was Hong Suk-chun. Beginning his career as a model, he made the switch to TV in the early 90s after catching a director's eye at a photo shoot. And right off the bat, Hong proved himself to be a comedic powerhouse. He quickly secured a permanent gig on the sitcom 3 Guys, 3 Girls, where he often received the biggest laughs out of anyone in the entire cast.
나랑 술 한잔 할 거야? 나 너무 슬퍼.
It seemed like Hong was on the fast track to becoming one of Korea's top celebrities. He should have been overjoyed, but something about this role just didn't sit right with him. In private, Hong wasn't exactly shy about his sexual orientation. He'd been open about it with his circle since college. But coming out on television at that time was unthinkable. As his manager would later put it, it would be like professional suicide. So Hong kept his sexuality under wraps around coworkers and network executives. This wasn't too tough at first. Especially back then, queer topics rarely came up in polite conversation, which I suppose was one benefit of the LGBTQ community being basically invisible at that point. But then came 3 guys and 3 girls, and suddenly, things got a lot more dangerous. Hong's character was loud, campy. On occasion, he even wore women's clothing.
나기
백회 실시!
어머 백개씩
실시하세요!
실시.
The show never gave him a boyfriend. We'd see hell freeze over before NBC let that happen. But anyone could tell what the writers were hinting at. Hong's character was, as the kids say, a bit fruity. This, of course, led tabloid journalists to speculate about the person behind the character. And for those first few years, Hong did everything he could to deny their accusations. 3 Guys, 3 Girls was the first regular gig he'd had in a long time, and he wasn't about to let anything jeopardize that stability. But shortly after the show was canceled in 2000, he decided he'd had enough. When he appeared on a variety show that September, the host asked him, once more, if he shared certain similarities with his sitcom character. This time, though, Hong answered truthfully. Yes, he identified as gay. The producers scrambled to erase footage of the interview, fearing it would spell the end of Hong's career. But it was too late. News of the incident quickly spread to TV insiders, and before long, journalists were emailing Hong with questions. But instead of dodging them like he did in the past, Hong decided to face them head-on. He agreed to a video interview in which he came out to his parents, his manager, and finally, the general public. The next morning, Hong found himself on the front page of every newspaper in Korea. The reaction, writes LA Times journalist John M. Gliona, was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, he was fired from all of his acting gigs. His parents considered disowning him. Worst of all, he couldn't leave his house without receiving dirty looks, threats of violence, or both.
So that's when you decided you're going to let the world know.
Yeah, I knew if I came out on TV, on public, I'm gonna lose everything, all my fame, something like this. But even if that, I'm still 30.
Yes.
So I'm still young.
Yeah.
And I thought like I could start again.
Yeah. You had to basically stay away from TV for a long time after that, right?
Almost 3.5 years.
3.5 years. You were nothing on TV, nothing on radio, nothing public at all. How was that response when you finally came out? Was it, you would say all of it was basically negative at the time?
Like a 99%.
99.
Then, 2 years after his exile from entertainment, Hong got a lucky break. A veteran screenwriter was eyeing him for a recurring role on her upcoming drama. Born in 1943, Kim Soo-hyun, no, not that Kim Soo-hyun, is easily one of the most prolific figures in Korean television history. Among her many accomplishments is the family drama What is Love, which made history as the first Korean drama to air on Chinese Central Television in 1997. Following its record-breaking run on CCTV, China bought the rights to dozens of Korean TV series, and by 1998, channels in Hong Kong and Japan were filling primetime slots with reruns of Korean melodramas. Known as the First Korean Wave, this boom in sales resulted in the Korean government tripling its budget for media exports, setting the stage for the flourishing cultural economy we see today. So, why would a big shot like Kim bother with a disgraced sitcom star? As it happened, Kim was an outspoken progressive on a mission to eliminate prejudice in South Korea. She'd been vocal about women's rights before, but when Hong came out, she saw a chance to tackle another issue: the rampant homophobia in Korean media. Her idea was this: if she included gay characters in her soap operas, maybe she could normalize homosexuality for mainstream audiences. And who better to realize her vision than Korea's first openly gay celebrity? With Hong by her side, Kim began work on her latest project, Perfect Love, a soap opera following the lives of a young married couple in their inner circle, which included a gay interior designer named Hong Sung-jo.
데이트 하나 보지.
Taking a cue from the real-life Hong, Sung-jo was a breath of fresh air for queer viewers. The main crew never makes jokes at his expense, and most importantly, he's shown time and again to be one of the most compassionate characters around. Though claiming this representation is perfect would be a stretch. Sung-jo, while charming, is mostly just a shoulder to cry on for his straight besties. Maybe with some more episodes he would have gotten a storyline of his own, but as is, his character fits pretty snugly into the archetype of gay best friend. To be fair, Kim probably didn't have much control over Hong's screen time. Even before Perfect Love went into production, its broadcaster, SBS, protested the inclusion of an openly gay character. Thanks to her pull in the industry, Kim eventually got her way, but it was with a caveat. Before each episode, SBS got to display a warning message discouraging children 15 and under from watching the series without a parent or guardian. Now, granted, we can't know for sure why SBS gave Perfect Love such a mature rating, but it's really impossible to see what they found so objectionable besides Hong's character. While they often dealt with tough topics, Kim's dramas were relatively mild even for the time, featuring barely anything in the way of sex, violence, or profanity. The network, however, seemed to consider even the slightest allusion to homosexuality as unsuitable for children. Thankfully, despite SBS's attempts to limit the show's audience, Perfect Love received warm reviews from critics. It didn't garner as much attention as some of Kim's earlier hits, but it was a success nonetheless. And Hong, who had spent 3 years searching for steady work, finally had a hit to his name as an openly gay actor. Of course, Hong's life didn't transform overnight. For appearing on Perfect Love, he received a barrage of hate mail from viewers. Netizens likewise flooded the show's discussion board with vulgar comments targeting Hong. And directors weren't exactly clamoring to hire an actor whose name by itself stirred controversy. But even though job offers weren't rolling in like they used to, Hong remained determined to push his way back into the industry. He grabbed every chance he could to appear on television, taking on guest roles and cameo spots in any show that would have him. He also opened Our Place, a restaurant that would later become a successful franchise with more than 9 locations across Itaewon. Nowadays, Hong is an international celebrity and a leading advocate for LGBT rights in Korea, appearing on some of the country's most popular variety shows as a single yet powerful voice for queer minorities. Reflecting on his role in Perfect Love, Hong told the LA Times, "That show saved my life. In Korean culture, there is strong pushback to any new idea. But once in a while, cooler heads prevail."
There were so many people opposing that project. There were protests outside, and it was a SBS drama. So it's one of the main dramas, I guess, broadcasting companies in Korea. And so many people were against it, but she stuck by it.
Yeah, she said,
No,
doesn't.
fuck you. No, we're going to do it. That's basically what happened. Yeah. And then you did it.
Yeah. So.
And that opened the doors up again.
Yes.
She asked him to play just a normal person who just happens to be gay.
Right.
And that opened up people's eyes and realized, oh, Tony or Seokchon oppa can be, he's just like a normal guy like everyone else. And his acting range is also very wide and created more opportunities for him to act in other stuff. And that's amazing. Oh my God.
Unfortunately, those cooler heads were nowhere near the National Assembly. Right after Hong's exit from TV in 2001, Korea's legislative branch passed the Human Rights Commission Act, a landmark set of laws tackling social discrimination. The first version of this act didn't mention sexual orientation anywhere, but many held out hope that someday queer Koreans would be included under the law. Fast forward to 2003, and that wish seemed close to becoming reality. Roh Moo-hyun, a progressive human rights lawyer, had just won the presidency, thanks in part to his campaign promises of revising the Human Rights Act to include sexual orientation. Some of Korea's queer community had thrown their support behind Roh in the election, thinking he would advocate for them in office. But all too predictably, Roh became much less outspoken about queer rights after winning the election. He made no effort to bring up the Human Rights Act to the National Assembly. In fact, he didn't do anything for queer people during his presidency. He never acknowledged homophobic violence, never addressed the lack of legal protections, nothing. And activists? They were pissed. They hounded Roh, hoping to hold him to his campaign pledge. But despite growing outcry, Roh didn't lift a finger to strengthen the 2001 Act. Not until October 2007, when he was on the brink of leaving office. It took a whopping 6 years since the original bill was passed for Roh to even suggest expanding the Human Rights Act. But hey, as the saying goes, better late than never. Or maybe not. As word got out about the bill, conservatives, businessmen, and religious leaders joined forces to protest the changes to the 2001 Act. Under intense pressure from these groups, the National Assembly deleted sexual orientation from the bill, along with categories such as military status, nationality, and most perplexingly, ideology. Once again, the queer community had been duped out of civil rights by a so-called progressive administration, but this time, they weren't going to stand by and watch. Borrowing gay slang for impromptu parties and drinking sessions, activists called a lightning meeting to figure out what had happened. And despite being scheduled for a weeknight with little advance notice, this first meeting was jam-packed, with members from gay, lesbian, and transgender-focused organizations. There, after a human rights lawyer broke down the changes to the bill, the Emergency Coalition was born. Joined by women's rights activists and labor unions, the Emergency Coalition of South Korea LGBT rights groups began protesting the revised bill as early as November of that year. As John Cho recalls in his article, these demonstrations were as creative as they were numerous. Some members blocked busy intersections with giant banners, while others shouted slogans from the steps of government offices. But all of these protests shared two things in common: visibility and cooperation. See, in decades past, minority groups within the LGBT community typically kept to themselves. Cutie Cutie and Chungkusai, for example, were advocacy groups exclusively for lesbians and gay men, respectively. With the arrival of the Emergency Coalition, these disparate groups suddenly found themselves side by side at protests and activist meetings. Working together did more than just boost their morale. It strengthened the group's influence 10 times over. Now, they had a fighting chance of catching the public's attention. And that was another thing. These demonstrators were willing to go out into the streets, publicly identifying themselves as part of the LGBT community. Before these protests, many queer people had held back from joining demonstrations like these to avoid losing their jobs or, in some cases, being disowned. This fear was so common among LGBT Koreans that even some hardcore activists wore masks and hats during rallies. But in the Emergency Coalition, members weren't just shedding their protective gear. They were posting highly personal coming-out videos on public forums as a kind of online protest. This mass coming out signaled a new era for gay liberation in Korea. No longer content with hiding behind hats and private chat rooms, the Korean queer community was finally putting faces to the movement. Despite all of this, the National Assembly refused to budge on the discrimination bill. But while the coalition fell short of its immediate goals, I wouldn't call these protests a failure. Besides inspiring a lot of teamwork, this period also saw the beginning of the bold and unapologetic queer activism that we see in Korea today. And little did activists know, television dramas would soon reflect the public's growing awareness of queer issues.
오빠 게이였어?
Something strange is afoot at the old coffee shop in Hongdae, Seoul. Tucked behind some shops in a back alley, the place had barely seen any business in all the time it'd been open. That is, until last week, when the shop announced it had come under new management. The change was almost overnight. Where once stood empty tables now sit dozens of customers, all craning to get a better look at the new staff. And that's another thing about this place. It's not just the daily specials drawing in all these people. What keeps them coming back is the customer service, namely, who's serving them. All 5 of the baristas are unusually handsome, and they use this to their full advantage, playfully flirting with the female guests who come through the cafe. Customers have noticed, though, that these guys seem far more interested in each other than any of their clientele. But they're all guys, right? What's really going on here? Is this coffee shop staffed by some kind of gay harem? Well, no, not exactly. But there's definitely something queer about the plot of 2007's Coffee Prince. Our story starts with Unchan, a 20-something tomboy whose short hair and lanky figure cause many to mistake her for a boy. Our male lead, Han-kyul, happens to be one such person, and being the conniving son of a CEO, he decides to use this to his advantage. First, he enlists Unchan to pose as his boyfriend to escape the blind dates set up by his grandmother. After that inevitably fails, he keeps her around by hiring her at his new cafe as a male server. That's right, for over half of the series' 17 episodes, our male lead firmly believes his love interest is another man. That synopsis probably wouldn't raise eyebrows today, but before Coffee Prince, cross-dressing and androgynous K-drama heroines were few and far between. The same could be said about the show's homoerotic undertones, which, while not unheard of in Korean television series, were rarely this blatant. By 2007 standards, Coffee Prince was revolutionary. It not only featured a gender nonconforming character, but also openly discussed homosexuality at a time when the government showed only cruelty and indifference. But does the show hold up today? Well, yes and no. The revelation that he may like men initially sends Han-kyul into a tailspin, so much so that he visits a quack psychiatrist to cure his condition. Not exactly what I'd call queer positive. But with time and reassurance from friends, he realizes he isn't dirty or diseased for liking someone of the same sex. Now, again, this might sound tame to our ears, but for a show to suggest that homosexuality was healthy and normal was nothing short of groundbreaking for 2007.
냅둬. 지들도 없는 남자건 여자건 무슨 상관이냐? 혹시 홍 사장님도 뭐 알고 계세요?
모르는 사람도 있었어? 잘 어울려 두 사람.
너는 이렇게 남의 말이라고 막 하고.
본찬 여자야. 안 될 거 뭐 있어? 남자였어도 상관은 없었겠다.
At the very least, it improved on dramas like Sad Temptation that painted gayness as a tragic affliction. At the same time, Coffee Prince does raise questions about exploiting homosexuality for romantic conflict. Despite asserting again and again that love is love, the show doesn't feature a single gay character in its 17-episode run. Many queer viewers feared Coffee Prince would inspire other shows to use homosexuality as a vehicle for heterosexual romance, as opposed to addressing homophobia head-on with explicitly gay characters. In an anonymous post on Soulbeats, a critical viewer writes, "A part of me feels that these gender-bender dramas are actually good for South Korean society. South Korea is immersed in a hyper-masculine, hyper-feminine culture, and these dramas shatter those stereotypes, particularly with characters like Coffee Prince's tomboy, Bong Eun-chan. However, on the other hand, I feel like these portrayals of almost gay characters also invalidates the true pain that closeted homosexuals experience because these dramas appear to only use homosexuality either as a comic device or a device in creating romantic conflict." Nevertheless, Coffee Prince was a smash hit with both local and international audiences, inspiring dozens of genderbenders from other networks. Most were carbon copies of the 2007 K-drama, featuring tomboys and complicated love triangles with their male co-stars. Few, if any, spoke earnestly about homosexuality and homophobia. Fewer still were dramas with actual LGBT characters. It seemed like these shows could hint at a character's queerness so long as they ended up in a straight relationship by the finale, a trope oddly reminiscent of Hayes-era Hollywood. This is all to say that the trend of pseudo-homosexuality in network dramas had its cons. But at the very least, the 2000s gender bender craze gave us our first queer-coded female protagonist. I'm talking, of course, about Yoonbok from 2008's Painter of the Wind, a period drama about a girl who disguises herself as a man to attend the Royal Painting Institute and, as we later discover, to avenge her late father. Along the way, she crosses paths with an eccentric artist who takes her under his wing. They fall in love, sexual frustration ensues. You get the gist. Sounds pretty familiar, right? At first glance, Painter of the Wind sounds like your typical gender-bending romance a la Coffee Prince. But while the ads push the heterosexual romance angle, the actual show barely develops that relationship outside of a couple of scenes. The real romance takes place between our heroine and her favorite concubine, Junghyun. And I do mean romance. The second their eyes meet, Yoonbok resolves to woo Junghyun at all costs.
향기가 있어 왔더니 꽃이 있군. 꽃을 함부로 밟는 나비가 어디 있답니까? 아리따운 꽃에는 인당 나비가 앉는 법.
The two spend their evenings at a local tavern, where Yoonbok gifts Junghyun beautiful paintings in return for her company. Junghyun even allows Yoonbok to paint her in the nude. But sure, this drama is totally heterosexual. Nothing gay about sensually caressing your gal pals, right? Even in 2008, viewers could tell there was something, well, queer about Yoonbok. Not only does she enjoy dressing in men's clothing, she takes a keen interest in the female figure, so much so that she risks her life multiple times to paint it. Her relationship with Junghyun only added to viewers' suspicions about her sexuality. But would the show make history by confirming the obvious? Audiences wouldn't have to wait long for an answer. Regarding a particularly suggestive scene between the two women, Junghyun's actress stated, "I hope you don't think of it as being homosexual. From Shin Yoonbok's point of view, it was a scene where an artist carefully observed a model to draw a picture."
어떤 남자가 그대를 거부할 수 있겠소?
Sure, Jan.
Yoonbok's actress also rejected queer interpretations of the relationship, claiming that while the two shared intimate moments, they were by no means a lesbian couple. But the most damning response came from director Jang Tae-woo, who shut down reporters' questions with a curt, "Absolutely not. Please don't look at it that way." Despite negative remarks from cast and crew, many fans maintain to this day that Yoonbok and Junghyun were embroiled in a sexual relationship. And honestly, more power to them. While the show might have chickened out of making them an official pairing, it's really heartwarming to see audiences reclaim characters for the gay community. But for explicit, positive representation, viewers would have to look elsewhere. Homosexuality was no longer a forbidden topic on TV, but it was often reduced to a punchline, or worse, a plot device to further a heterosexual relationship. Networks appeared to tell queer audiences, "We'll exploit homosexuality for conflict, but forget about actually seeing yourselves on screen." LGBT folks in Korea weren't doing so well around this time either. Though the gay liberation movement had grown by leaps and bounds since 2007, the government seemed less likely than ever to pass anti-discrimination laws. Every time a pro-gay bill reached the National Assembly, conservatives would crawl out of the woodworks to decry the evils of homosexuality, claiming that even minor protections for queer citizens would lead to the destruction of the traditional family.
처음부터 하나님이 마련해준 남녀 관계를 만들어준 그대로 분리돼서 사는 게 원칙이지. 이게 남자끼리 살고 여자끼리 살고 인정해달라는 그건 말도 안 돼.
These protests ended up catching the attention of the United Nations, who, in 2010, set up a special subcommittee to try and push the 2007 bill through the National Assembly. Yet even the efforts of an international human rights council proved no match for the Christian right. Once again, conservatives responded with rage and hostility, and the bill spent a few months in legal limbo before being withdrawn in January 2011. It was a dark time in the movement. Despite growing awareness of queer issues, conservatives remained determined to push the topic of homosexuality back into the closet. But amid efforts to erase queer people from public life, one woman fought tooth and nail to get them on network television. Remember Kim Soo-hyun, the TV writer who helped Hong Suk-jeon rebuild his career? A few months before the anti-discrimination bill whipped conservatives into a frenzy, she'd finalized the script for Life is Beautiful, a 63-episode soap opera about a family living on Jeju Island. Right away, the show set itself apart by trading the glamour of Seoul for a coastal village just south of the Korean peninsula. Rest assured, you won't find any tables here. But that wasn't all that caught viewers' attention. The Yang household had a whole mix of eclectic characters, working moms, half-siblings, even divorced grandparents, making them one of the most unique Korean TV families to date. Not only that, but this family, aunts, uncles, and cousins included, all lived together under one massive roof in Jeju-do. This setup was pretty standard in Korea 60 to 70 years ago, when Confucianism dictated that 5 generations of a family should live together. But nowadays, with cities getting pricier, it's not so easy for your average middle-class Korean to keep up the tradition. This is probably why Kim chose rural Jeju over a big city like Seoul or Busan. With its relatively cheap real estate, the island made it possible for a big family like the Yangs to live together without racking up serious debt. But there could be another reason why the screenwriter chose such an unusual location. As media studies professor Basil Glynn wrote in 2017, the secluded setting of Life is Beautiful also served as a metaphor for the Yangs' rejection of the mainstream. The island of Jeju is both an actual and symbolic setting for a family exiled from mainland Korea and from mainstream Korean drama. Indeed, most of the Yangs are misfits in some way or another, banished from the mainland and normal society. Step-parents Byung-tae and Min-jae are just one example. Also featured on the show are Byung-tae's 2 younger brothers, both unmarried despite being in their mid-40s. Not to mention Byung-tae's mother, who supported 3 sons on a single paycheck after separating from her husband. If we're talking typical Korean families, this one is anything but. Though I doubt anyone who followed Kim's work was surprised by the more unusual aspects of Life is Beautiful. Since her debut in the 1970s, Kim had gained somewhat of a reputation for stretching the rules of Korean television. In fact, her most recent drama, Mom's Dead Upset, had made headlines for commenting on gender inequality in South Korea. Despite some backlash from conservative critics, the show was a runaway hit, breaking viewership records and winning dozens of awards. But little did viewers at the time know that Kim's most ambitious project lay just beyond the horizon. From the beginning, Kim planned for the Yang's eldest son to be the most prominent queer character in Korean television history. Through his character arc, the show would touch on topics including discrimination, familial acceptance, and even marriage equality, a subject which, you may recall, was still deeply controversial in the United States. It's safe to assume Kim knew she was playing with fire. One wrong move, and the show's network could see massive boycotts from angry conservatives. Not to mention, the negative publicity could taint her reputation as the nation's most prolific screenwriter. But if there's one thing Kim had learned from over 30 years in the industry, it was that playing it safe rarely made for good television. Just as she had 10 years earlier with Perfect Love, she stood firm in her convictions, even when the network pressured her to make cuts to the script. In her own words, "I approached the issue as though it could have happened to my son. It was something I was determined to do, and I will continue to tell their story to the end." So, here's how she did it. In episode 1, we meet Yang Tae-seob, a compassionate doctor who just can't seem to keep a relationship going for more than a couple of months. Almost immediately after his introduction, we see him break things off with his latest girlfriend, a fellow doctor named Yoo Tae-young. Tae-young thankfully agrees that the chemistry just isn't there, and the two part ways as friends. The only ones unhappy with this arrangement are Tae-seob's parents, who are still stuck on the traditional Korean idea that the eldest son should marry before his siblings. So they kick the matchmaking into high gear, setting Tae-seob up on blind dates left and right. But Tae-seob isn't having it. He refuses to go on any of these dates, and begs his parents over and over to stay out of his love life.
제 여자 문제에 대해서는 어머니 생각하지 말아주세요. 어머니 생각 필요 없습니다. 솔직히 저거 문자 당황스러웠어요. 그것까지 하실 줄은 몰랐습니다. 당장 저녁에 만나서 다시 얘기하자는 거 거절하느라 진땀 뺐어요. 그런 일을 왜 만드세요?
We can of course understand Tae-sub wanting to keep his private affairs, well, private. But it seems there's a deeper reason for his discomfort. That reason, we discover, has something to do with a man named Kim Kyung-soo. Kim is a handsome photographer teaching at a local university, and secretly, Tae-sub's boyfriend of over 6 months. This reveal surprised even those who had read the series synopsis. Having a recurring gay character was already a bold move in itself. But Kim Soo-hyun pushed things even further by making Tae-sub's relationship a core storyline. Episode 1 of Life is Beautiful marked countless milestones for Korean television, and as the show continued, Kim would only become more radical with her political commentary. But more on that later. As his relationship with Kyung-soo deepens, Tae-sub begins to grow apart from the rest of his family. He becomes irritable and withdrawn at meals, often locking himself in his room before anyone can figure out what's bothering him. This can't look good from an outsider's perspective. Why give your family the cold shoulder when, to their knowledge, they've done nothing wrong? His sister, Ji-hye, says as much in episode 18.
형님 들어왔어요?
늦는 날이 자자.
뭘? 쉬세요.
아이고, 폼. 한마디 더 하면 죽냐? 쉬세요 하는데.
If you're anything like me, though, you probably recognize this pattern of behavior. Talking to family members when you're closeted can feel like walking on eggshells. Every conversation is a test of, how much can I tell them without accidentally outing myself? It's an exhausting ritual, one that, after a while, feels pointless to continue. So, you stop talking to people in your family. You withdraw into yourself. And your family is none the wiser to your suffering. For its time, Life is Beautiful portrayed this balancing act with impressive accuracy. Not only did the show provide people with a relatable queer protagonist, it showcased some of the challenges of being queer in a homophobic country. That sounds pretty boilerplate by today's standards, but as I've hopefully highlighted so far in this video, gay people were seldom portrayed sympathetically in media during the 2000s. Unless you were gay or knew someone who was, you likely had no reference for the struggles gay people faced on a daily basis. This is why it was so crucial for Tae-sub to be a likable point-of-view character, someone who viewers could sympathize with, even if they had mixed feelings about queer people. Seeing his pain at having to hide his true self, it's hard not to feel sympathy for him, and anger at those who keep people like him in the closet. Thankfully, Tae-sub at least has his partner to confide in. Here's Tae-sub's actor, Song Chang-hee, on their relationship dynamic. Kyung-soo is sort of a releasing channel for Tae-sub. It's not like Tae-sub has set up a wall against his family, but it is difficult for him to mingle with them completely because of his secret, while on the other hand, he can be himself completely in front of Kyung-soo. Kyung-soo also opens up to Tae-sub about his past. As the eldest son of a respected professor in Seoul, he too had lived in the closet for fear of ruining his family's reputation. But despite doing everything right, he could feel himself growing more miserable by the day. With that realization, he came out to his parents and moved to Jeju for a fresh start. This unfortunately cost Kyung-soo his relationship with his family, but even still, he finds himself feeling lighter and happier than he ever had in Seoul. A fact that encourages Tae-sub as he navigates his own coming-out journey. Brought together by their similar pasts, Tae-sub and Kyung-soo quickly find themselves falling deeper in love. And Life is Beautiful doesn't pull any punches here. We see the couple hold hands, stare lovingly into each other's eyes, and in episode 16, they even share a passionate kiss. Well, sort of. In her script notes, Kim Soo-hyun made it crystal clear that she planned for Tae-sub and Kyung-soo to share an on-screen kiss in episode 16. Not surprisingly, this caused a minor panic at SBS, and Kim was forced to cut the kiss from the final script. But not before she came up with an idea. Maybe she couldn't show an on-screen kiss, but SBS hadn't said anything about bedroom eyes or hands. nor had they forbidden the editors from adding romantic music in post. Effectively, leaving the big kiss up to viewers' imaginations made the scene appear more risque. So much so that it appeared in national newspapers the next morning. The Chosun Ilbo published an article gauging audience reactions, in which one fan hilariously said it was even more beautiful than a kiss between a man and a woman. Kim had, once again, emerged victorious despite network interference. And to her delight, the kiss drew 19.3% of viewers nationwide, marking the series' highest ratings yet. But Kim was nowhere near finished with Tae-sub and Kyung-soo. 2 weeks after the kiss scene, Life is Beautiful left audiences speechless with its most daring storyline yet.
저요. 동성애자예요.
First, some context. While visiting from Seoul, Kyung-soo's mother goes through her son's things with the excuse of cleaning up around his apartment. By chance, she finds a package with Tae-sub's home address and blackmails him into breaking up with her son. Yeah, real classy. Tae-sub is understandably terrified, but Kyung-soo isn't about to let his mother sabotage his relationship. Under the guise of helping Min-jae with the photo project, he visits the Yang pension to plead with Tae-sub to ignore his mother's orders. Though he probably should have picked somewhere besides the hallway to have this conversation, because just as he pulls Tae-sub into an embrace, the couple escape to a nearby pier, where Kyung-soo comes up with a plan to save Tae-sub from having to come out to his family.
그런 줄 몰랐더니 내가 이상한 놈이더라 그래도 돼. 자꾸 치근덕대서 미치겠다고. 말 되는 소리를 해라. 너 보호하는 일이라면 난 아무래도 상관없다.
But he needn't have bothered. On his walk back to the house, Tae-sub runs into his sister, Cho-rong, who hurriedly assures him that she's totally fine with him being gay. Really, she was just upset because she had a giant crush on Kyung-soo.
좋아하는 사람 있어요? 생겼어요?
있어요. 생겼어요.
The two reconcile, and Cho-rong promises that his secret is safe with her. As it turns out, though, her support is just what Tae-sub needed to take the plunge and come out to his family. The next morning, Tae-sub sits down with his stepmother and prepares for the worst. But while Min-jae is initially shocked by the news, she shows none of the disgust or anger Tae-sub had come to expect from his family. Instead, her heart breaks over the years he spent alone, too afraid of rejection and ridicule to confide in her or Byung-tae. She may not fully understand homosexuality, but as she tells Tae-sub, nothing will stop her from embracing him as her son.
네 의도가 어쨌든 나한테 먼저 얘기해줘서 고맙다. 어떻게 해보자.
Tae-sub's father also defies our expectations for older conservative men. Far from being angry at Tae-sub, Byung-tae only fears that society will ostracize his son for his sexuality, a reasonable concern given the ongoing debate over anti-discrimination laws. But whereas many parents in his shoes enforce conformity, Byung-tae resolves to make his home a haven for Tae-sub. If the world is cruel to him, he can at least take refuge in his family. The episode ends with one of my favorite scenes in all of K-drama, a heartfelt reconciliation between father and son.
정말 죄송합니다.
What an episode. Never had a network drama featured a storyline about coming out, much less one that championed acceptance. But Kim Soo-hyun couldn't have written better characters to tackle this issue. The Yang parents are perfect representatives of the older generation, as they revere tradition and know little about contemporary social issues. For most of their lives, homosexuality was so taboo that it was practically invisible in Korean society. Yet, when Tae-sub comes out to them, they manage to put their fears aside and accept him with open arms. They're still not progressive icons exactly, but they're willing to reconsider their views once they realize how they've hurt someone they care about.
미련이 있는 것도 사실이고 그렇지만 진심. 난 니들이 쭉 행복하면 좋겠어.
And that, I think, is a more realistic goalpost for conservative parents, Korean or otherwise. The series essentially tells audiences that so long as you're trying to understand your queer child, you're moving in the right direction. Baby steps, right? Really, most, if not all, of Taesub's relatives serve as fantastic role models for viewers with queer family members. Keeping in line with the progressive politics of younger generations, Taesub's siblings accept him without a second thought. The more noteworthy reaction comes from Uncle Byung-jun, a savvy hotel manager played by 2000's heartthrob Kim Sang-jung. Normally stoic and reserved, Byung-jun shows a surprising amount of emotion when defending his nephew. Not only does he help his sister-in-law process the news, he makes it his mission to ensure Taesub and his partner are welcomed into the family with open arms. Later in the series, Taesub even considers asking him to help out with his commitment ceremony.
초롱 씨? 아니, 큰 삼촌. 해주실까? 해주실 거야. 부탁드려봐.
Though not everyone is so accepting. Uncle Byung-gu takes the news especially poorly, calling Taesub a dirty bastard and refusing to eat breakfast with him. The show criticizes his behavior via Jihye, Taesub's oldest sister.
야, 엄마 너 선택의 문제인 것 같으면 왜 굳이 그쪽을 선택하겠어요? 말도 안 되는 편견에 사회 구성원으로 인정도 못 받고 법률적인 결혼 안 되죠. 의료보험 상속권도 없죠. 부당해고 승진 대상에서 제외돼도 싸울 길 없죠. 그런 온갖 불이익 당하면서 왜 굳이 그걸 선택하겠어요?
As preachy as it sounds, this dialogue was a much-needed corrective to myths about homosexuality proliferated by conservative politicians. It's also worth noting that the only characters who raise a stink over Taesub are an uncle who leeches off of his older brothers and a guy who cheats on his pregnant wife. Not exactly role models. By contrast, the show portrays progressive family members as loyal, lovable, and, at least in Byung-jun's case, sophisticated. In effect, Life is Beautiful suggests that tolerance is a moral good, a bold stance for a K-drama, even by modern standards. But would audiences react to Taesub with the same compassion and understanding? By most accounts, yes. Episodes 20 and 21 drew in 19.3 and 22.1% of viewers respectively, a record that would remain unbeaten for the next 30 episodes. Viewers also flooded the show's discussion board with praise for Song Chang-he's performance, marking a complete 180 from reactions to Hong Sok-chun and Perfect Love. Granted, a lot had changed since 2003, but many remained hostile towards queer people even as the government made strides towards tolerance. Lest we forget that just a few weeks after this episode aired, conservatives would wage war against the Ministry of Justice for suggesting that gay people deserved basic human rights. In all likelihood, many viewers began Life is Beautiful with the same prejudices as Uncle Byung-gu. Like many men of his generation, he views homosexuality as a disease, a social sickness that could destroy society left untreated. But come time for the finale, he's the one urging his mother to accept Taesub, insisting that sexual orientation isn't something that can be changed.
제일 개같이 펄펄 뛴 건 전데요, 엄마. 그런데 뭐 이런저런 이유로 아닌 척 눈 가림 결혼도 해보고 그래도 그게 바뀌는 게 아니래요. 불어 그러는 게 아니라 그렇게 생겨먹은 거래요.
So, what happened? Byung-gu owes much of his transformation to Taesub's regular appearances on the show. Taesub and his boyfriend live closer to Jeju City, but they're constantly coming by the house for family gatherings and celebrations, meaning Byung-gu can't ignore the issue in the hopes it'll magically disappear. If he's going to keep living with the other Yangs, he needs to come to terms with his nephew's sexuality one way or another. The first few weeks of cohabitation are a little rocky, no one learns tolerance overnight, but as Taesub and Kyung-soo spend more time around the house together, they begin chipping away at Byung-gu's deeply ingrained biases.
너 임마 경수 너무 기다리게 하잖아. 올라가 봐 임마.
예.
In much the same way, Taesub and Kyung-soo normalized homosexuality for a majority conservative audience. Taesub and Kyungsoo remained central characters for all 63 episodes, giving homophobic viewers ample time to get cozy with the idea of two men in love. What's more, these audiences got a first-hand look at what a typical queer relationship might look like. From romantic strolls on the beach to cozy nights in, Taesub and Kyungsoo showed that their love was just as real and reliable as any heterosexual couple. They had their disagreements, but they always worked things out through open communication. And most importantly, they never wavered in their commitment to each other. Now, this all might seem pretty run-of-the-mill for us in 2024, but back then, for a lot of people, homosexuality was still this distant, abstract concept mainly associated with AIDS and moral panics. With the introduction of two handsome gay leads on a family drama, audiences began to realize that queer folks weren't the shadowy figures conjured up by conservative politicians. On the contrary, their lives were as rooted in the hustle and bustle of everyday life as everyone else. But enough about the straights. Remember Hong Suk-chun? In a phone call with Yonhap News after the broadcast, he told reporters, "I watched the episode with my gay friends, and everyone cried. I am so grateful to writer Kim Soo-hyun. Someone should have told this story a long time ago." It should come as no surprise that these episodes were cathartic for queer viewers. For almost a decade now, dramas had shied away from any sort of gay representation, using homosexuality only to create conflict between straight characters. Seemingly out of the blue, here was a show that championed queer rights and criticized Korea for its refusal to change with the times. Life is Beautiful was nothing short of a revelation for network television, one that would linger in the minds of those who saw it for years after its final episode hit airwaves. As the show drew to a close, one blogger wrote,
필자는 아직 부모님께 커밍아웃을 하지 않았다. 아직은 아니지만 곧 내 활동에 대해 알릴 예정이다. 아무래도 이러한 마음가짐을 갖게 된 데에는 그동안 단체 활동가로서 활동한 영향뿐만 아니라 인생은 아름다워 드라마가 보여준 가족들의 모습도 한몫했을 것이다. 드라마 인생은 아름다워가 소중한 이유 중 하나는 바로 가족 구성원 모두 서로 아프고 상처난 자리를 만져주고 따뜻하게 감싸주기 때문이다. 그래서 인생은 아름다운 것이다. 현실에서도 잘못된 신념과 어리석은 욕망으로 타인을 상처주는 일이 생기지 않길 바라며 모두에게 따뜻했던 드라마 인생은 아름다워가 오래 기억되기를 바란다.
There's so much more to say about Life is Beautiful, like how the show spurred a right-wing Christian group to take out an ad in Korea's largest newspaper, or how Kim Soo-hyun snuck Taesub's wedding vows past SBS censors. We don't have time for both of those stories today, but I go into more detail about how the show handled gay marriage and conservative backlash in my original Life is Beautiful video. I'll put the link in the description box. All said, Kim Soo-hyun's sprawling family saga was a game-changer for Korean network television. In a study conducted more than 2 years after the series finale, researcher Jong Sung-kim concluded that Life is Beautiful had significantly raised awareness and increased discussion about the issues facing sexual minorities in Korean society. An impressive feat for any show, let alone a PG-rated drama airing after 10 p.m. The gay community was especially vocal with their appreciation for the show's portrayal of gay characters. A few weeks after Life is Beautiful aired its final episode, the Korean Sexual Minority Culture and Rights Center presented Kim Soo-hyun with the Rainbow Human Rights Award for her drama's realistic depiction of the life of homosexuals in Korea. That same month, Song Chang-yi accepted the award for excellence in a weekend drama to thunderous applause. Yet, as I point out in my original video, the series was scarcely promoted after its initial airing and denied any form of international release. Life is Beautiful wasn't a failure in terms of ratings. Far from it, actually. It was written by one of the most revered and commercially successful Korean screenwriters of its time, and it's one of her best works. So why did SBS let the show fall into obscurity? Well, I'll let past me explain. This is just speculation. But Life is Beautiful's eagerness to authentically engage with pressing social issues likely rendered it unsuitable for exportation overseas. In her drama, Kim Soo-hyun heavily criticizes Korea for its intolerance of sexual minorities and champions progressive values. Her refusal to promote an apolitical, sanitized image of Korea made the series less palatable and thus less marketable. So in spite of the accolades, in spite of its immensely accomplished cast and crew, the series was left to gather dust. Okay, so SBS kept the show in Korea to avoid offending sensibilities overseas. Fair enough. But what about domestic audiences? Surely, networks would see the popularity of Life is Beautiful as a sign to feature more LGBT characters. Right? As it happened, another show with queer themes was making waves around the time Life is Beautiful began airing. Though, unlike Kim Soo-hyun's drama, this one stuck to the tried-and-true formula of earlier hits, featuring an ambiguously gay but ultimately straight lead, cheeky double entendres, and a dramatic "I can't believe it's not homosexual" reveal. Now, to its credit, Personal Taste did put a fresh spin on some of these tropes. Instead of the usual spunky tomboy, we've got a vaguely effeminate architect who's willing to lie about his sexuality to get his way with a client. Jesus Christ, it sounds even worse when I say it out loud. In many ways, Personal Taste represents a return to the old way of approaching queer topics. I guess it discusses homosexuality more openly than earlier pseudo-gay dramas, but I hesitate to say whether that's for the better. The drama appears to codify many of the tropes we see in shows today. There are a handful of gay characters, but save for lonely director Choi, the show portrays queer men as one-dimensional stereotypes.
친구. 친구. 물 가져와!
My gripe isn't with queer femmes, of course. I just think it's a little disconcerting that the show paints gay men with one shallow brushstroke.
알죠. 아는데 가끔 너무 서럽고.
Knowing the show aired alongside Life is Beautiful makes these sorts of scenes really fucking infuriating. Like, here's a show that genuinely broke ground with its LGBT representation, and it's overshadowed by a rom-com that reinforces the biases it's trying so hard to dismantle. Well, claiming Personal Taste completely overshadowed Life is Beautiful would be a little bit of a stretch. The drama enjoyed only modest success in Korea, drawing around 13.3% of viewers per episode, as opposed to Life is Beautiful's lifetime average of 19.9. But while Personal Taste was a domestic disappointment, the show found a second life among international fans. In a statement released shortly after the premiere, MBC claimed they'd already received dozens of calls from broadcasters looking to buy the rights to the show. By October of that year, Personal Taste had already aired in Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, and Thailand, an impressive feat for a drama with only middling to mediocre ratings in its home country. Though, glancing at the first episode, it's clear to me why MBC was so adamant about selling the show to overseas broadcasters. As opposed to Life is Beautiful, a show that openly criticizes Korea's intolerance of sexual minorities, Personal Taste religiously avoids political commentary in either direction. We never get any insight into how being gay might affect Jinho or director Choi's careers, even though workplace discrimination was, and is, still incredibly common in Korea. Nor does the show challenge harmful ideas about homosexuality. For all intents and purposes, Personal Taste views queer men as the caricatures propped up by conservative hate groups. And again, this depiction of femme gays wouldn't be such a problem if the show gave them any amount of depth or just treated them respectfully. Instead, Personal Taste paints gay men as objects to be feared or ridiculed, making its so-called representation feel pretty mean-spirited. In any case, Personal Taste's refusal to acknowledge the realities of Korea's queer population made it the perfect export. Thanks in part to the show's success overseas, gay men began appearing in more mainstream dramas, not as well-rounded characters, but as homophobic stereotypes and lonely outcasts. Surely, though, Korea had to have made more shows like Life is Beautiful at some point, right? Well, sort of. A little over a year after Life is Beautiful hit airwaves, KBS aired Daughters of Bilitis. The first, and as of today, only, Korean drama with 6 lesbian leads. I should clarify that this wasn't a full-fledged TV show. It was part of an ongoing series of hour-long specials on KBS, similar to the one-act plays that ran from the late 90s into the early 2000s. But even with those limitations, the drama still seemed like a step in the right direction for gay representation. Life is Beautiful may have had Dae-sub and Kyung-soo, but their struggles ultimately made up one of many plotlines involving the show's extensive cast. Daughters of Bilitis, on the other hand, focused on not 1, not 2, but 3 lesbian couples navigating work, love, and family in Seoul. These 6 women were at the heart of the show, and according to director Han Jun-seo, each of their conflicts would shed light on an aspect of queer life in South Korea. Watching the special today, it seems Han was true to his word. Our first pair of lesbians are students who, due to a series of leaked photos, become targets of harassment by other girls at their school. This plotline was, unfortunately, all too realistic for the time. Cyberbullying and blackmail have long been vicious problems in Korean schools and pose a special threat to gay and trans students, who are often gaslit into taking responsibility for whatever harassment comes their way. And since Korean civil law still doesn't recognize homophobia as a form of discrimination, these students often have no way of fighting back against bigoted students or even teachers. On top of that, many students can't go to their parents with these issues without putting themselves in an even worse situation. We see this in Daughters of Bilitis with Kim Do-yeon, who attempts to tell her parents about what's happening at school, but backs off after her mom goes on a tirade about a gay celebrity. As someone who grew up in a similar household, this scene was honestly pretty difficult to watch, but I can definitely see why the writers chose to include it. Especially in the early 2000s, I doubt many people knew the extent of harassment faced by gay students. With this special, perhaps viewers would realize just how awful things were for these kids, and be inspired to take action. But back to the show. As Do-yeon grapples with schoolyard bullies, our second couple contends with the news that one of them is pregnant. The pregnant woman, Young-un, is by all accounts a lesbian, but she feels she has to at least try being normal, because wouldn't that make her and her girlfriend's lives so much easier?
난 보통 여자들처럼 살고 싶었거든. 대학에 들어가자마자 남자들 만나기 시작했어.
This storyline took me by surprise for several reasons, most of all because it touches on one of the many intersections between misogyny and homophobia. Young-un wants to be normal, not only because of widespread discrimination against LGBT people, but also because her worth as a woman is tied to her relationships with men. Especially in a country like Korea that's overrun by incels and anti-feminists, I can understand how being a woman would motivate someone like Young-un to have an affair. Like so many women who experience compulsory heterosexuality, she feels she must situate herself in this sexist society somehow, even at the cost of her relationship with her girlfriend, Hana. Heartbroken by Young-un's betrayal, Hana goes out for a night of drinking and billiards. It's here we meet Choi Hyung-ja and Park Myung-hee, a devoted couple in their mid-60s who co-own the lesbian bar, Club Bilitis. The two appear to be mother figures to the younger women who visit the club, including our very own Kang Hana, who asks them for advice about her and Young-un. Hyung-ja tells her that she, too, dealt with compulsory heterosexuality, though she took things a step further by settling down and starting a family. Only after decades in a loveless marriage did Hyung-ja finally come out of the closet and begin dating Myung-hee, but her freedom came at a cost. She no longer has a relationship with anyone in her family, including her adult daughter, who has refused to speak with her for the past 10 years. I have to say, I think this final storyline is the strongest out of the three. Much like Byung-gu from Life is Beautiful, Hyung-ja's daughter is a sort of audience surrogate, telling Hyung-ja all the things homophobic viewers want to say to her. Why couldn't you just suck it up and stay married for your family? I can't understand why you'd want to be with another woman. And so on. But rather than leave the conversation at that, Daughters of Bilitis uses Hyung-ja's daughter to inspire empathy in more conservative viewers. Through the daughter's discussions with Myung-hee, we begin to see why Hyung-ja couldn't stay married to a man. Coming out wasn't just what she wanted to do. It was a matter of survival. She'd been incredibly depressed during her marriage, mostly because she felt shame at hiding such a large part of herself from her family. Had she stayed in the closet, the guilt would have crushed her. Worse, she would have gone her entire life without finding happiness with someone she truly cared about. And really, doesn't everyone deserve the chance to find someone like that? Okay, some of the dialogue here is a little on the nose, but I'm willing to forgive some of the more obvious lines, if only because I know the writers were definitely on a tight schedule and had an important message to get across. But besides that, the show is surprisingly solid for 2011. Each couple is portrayed respectfully, and the show goes out of its way to make homosexuality less scary to conservative viewers. Unfortunately, many conservatives refuse to tune in at all. They spent August 7th, the day of the broadcast, parked outside of KBS's Seoul headquarters, demanding that the broadcaster cancel that night's program. Among these 50-some protesters were members of the Parents Association for Patriotism and the National Coalition for Basungyun, or Proper Sexual Culture. I guess it's true what they say, there really is an organization for everything. These groups were furious that a public broadcaster would even entertain airing a show which, according to them, fostered homosexuality among youth. This sort of fear-mongering wasn't new. Just a year earlier, in September 2010, a right-wing Christian group had published a half-pager in the Chosun Ilbo that read, "If my son, who became gay after watching Life is Beautiful, dies of AIDS, SBS will be held responsible." Going one step further, the ad asserted that homosexuality was not an inherent trait, but rather something acquired and spread through cultural influences. The cherry on top? Many of these so-called statistics came from none other than Basungyun, the same organization behind the 2011 Daughters of Bilitis pickets. Fortunately for us, the facts presented by these organizations weren't just wrong. They were obviously wrong. Somewhere between claiming that homosexuals are 730 times more likely to contract AIDS and postulating that living in a large city may somehow turn children gay, the ad lost whatever little credibility it had to begin with. Even SBS, the same broadcaster that had reprimanded Kim Soo-hyun for writing a same-sex kiss scene, admitted the ad was ridiculous, writing, "The claim that someone could become gay and die of AIDS after watching Life is Beautiful is itself a leap of logic." As a result, most people rightly dismissed the ad as a big overreaction, and SBS went right along with airing the series. KBS reacted differently. On the night of August 7th, the broadcaster disabled the replay feature for Daughters of Bilitis on its website, meaning viewers couldn't rewatch the special without having recorded it live. This, KBS said, was out of consideration for teenagers, because the drama should not be viewed by anyone under the age of 19. It's hard to read this and not think of SBS's content warning for Perfect Love. Despite having little to no sex, drugs, or profanity, both dramas received restricted ratings simply for featuring gay characters. With Daughters of Bilitis, though, viewing wasn't just restricted to mature audiences. The drama was erased from the internet. For years, the only way to rewatch the show was by tracking down re-uploads of recordings on shady websites. And subtitles were hardly available, meaning international fans like myself were out of luck if we wanted to tune in. The quiet demise of Daughters of Bilitis leaves us with one question. How? How did these protesters bully a public broadcaster, the biggest in Korea, into nearly erasing one of its own dramas from existence? This might sound a little tinfoil hatty, but I think the answer has something to do with these conservative groups switching strategies. By itself, the headline, "Life is Beautiful turned my child gay," might have rung some alarm bells, but those worries quickly dissolved after Basungyun tried to back its claims with actual evidence. Seeing this, conservatives realized they couldn't rely on statistics to create a moral panic. Their argument would have to rely on something more primal, something that poked at subconscious fears about minorities, powerful enough to override logic and prevent any actual discussion from taking place. And that's exactly what happened with Daughters of Bilitis. The protesters didn't explain how the special would corrupt your kids. They just asserted it was true. This think of the children strategy was so effective that for nearly 11 years, KBS hid Daughters of Bilitis from the world. Just like Life is Beautiful, it was doomed by its own broadcaster to become a cult drama, available to watch only through illegal re-uploads and low-res screen recordings. Needless to say, the fate of these dramas, Life is Beautiful and Daughters of Bilitis, says something about Korea's attitude towards its LGBT citizens during this period. I think Basil Glynn put it best when he wrote, "As Life is Beautiful has been pieced back together again in various different forms by fans for international consumption, there exist today various unauthorized, semi-pirated versions to fill the void left by the inaccessible original." While this reveals much about the rescue acts that can be achieved by drama enthusiasts, the underground and illegal existence Life is Beautiful now has also offers an apt metaphor for the response an intolerant society has had to its longest-running drama to date about homosexuality. Whether Life is Beautiful could have gone further, been braver, or more authentic or not, it is still tremendously important and valuable for being the serial drama that brought homosexuality itself out of the closet in Korean drama, even if it has, regrettably, been put firmly back in there again. For now. Okay, that's it. That's all I have for y'all. Thank you so much for waiting. The code word for the end of this video is avocado toast, so comment that and I'll know you've gotten to this point in the video. I know this took like 10 years, but I really wanted to make sure I researched everything super thoroughly. Like there were a couple of times where I had to rewrite entire sections of the video because I just went back and like fact-checked myself and realized I was completely wrong about everything. And that was kind of torture. But it was ultimately worth it to me because I learned so much and I discovered so many great writers who I just didn't know were out there talking about this really under-discussed subject. Like, it's just so interesting to me. But anyway, I'm sure I still got some stuff wrong somewhere, and if you feel I've made a mistake, please feel free to point that out to me. I'm going to start a new comment where I'm basically just going to put any corrections to this video. Still, I hope you really enjoyed this. This is probably the most work I've put into anything, probably ever. It was exhausting, but I'm really proud of it, and I really want people to see it and get as much out of it as I did. And if that ending felt a little inconclusive, that's for a reason. I'm definitely going to be creating a part 2 at some point. Hopefully it won't take as long as this part did, because I've kind of got, I'm standing on an actual, premise now. I've got an idea going, but, I've no promises. In the meantime, though, I'll be releasing some smaller, more low-key, low-effort videos, so everyone knows I'm alive. So be looking forward to that, at least. And I'll stop talking now. I've been talking for too long, but just enjoy this really shitty joke video I've made when I was I think 15. Life is Beautiful had this thing where every episode ended with a dramatic fall from stairs, or I don't know, they tripped over something. So I compiled some of the best ones and put the Roblox oof sound over it. I was so creative as a child. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you, hopefully, relatively soon.